One of the first things I did to get audience feedback was right at the beginning when I looked at my initial ideas, and I outlined them to the audience, and then I got some peer feedback and teacher feedback from that. That was just regarding my ideas and just clarity on it at the time. I was still a bit confused about it. So, but that did help in informing me what, say, people might have been interested about. Obviously, at the time, I wouldn't have had too much feedback, not enough to inform me in any way. But it was useful the same, helping to clarify my ideas. For my title and the typography of it, I got feedback from my target audience, both male and female, and they both seemed to agree what was the more appropriate font. One of the first pieces of feedback I got included putting down on a piece of paper the fonts, the typography that I was thinking of using for my short film, Derange. And I got both genders to look at it. They generally agreed on the same one, and a majority of them were in fact media students, so it meant that they were going to be more critical of it and see what was best suited to the genre of my film. So that's what was good about taking that research. The predominant part of my research was after my second rough cut of my film, I got members of the target audience to look at my film. In the video that I attached to the post-production audience feedback, I only have girls in it. There is about 6 of them, and many of them were in my peer group. So it means that they were more likely to be biased in their response. However, some of them were media students, so it meant that they were going to be more critical of it. Some of the feedback that I got from them included how they thought it was good, essentially, but there was some things that they did get a little confused on. I tried addressing questions talking about how, whether the narrative was confusing, because there are some bits which initially I planned on going into more depth with, say, through the use of sounds and more pieces of narrative to make up more of a story, like, say, where Alicia is running towards the distance, and something's happened to make her cry. I don't think it was that confused people, it was more the fact that there were these strange different words. And as someone that usually reads dystopian literature, or say watches lots of dystopian literature, films, sci-fi films, it's not been known to me that you're thrown straight into hearing these new different words, and I think for an audience that's not particularly associated with that genre, it got a little bit confusing, and I suppose that's what's a negative thing about it, is that at least half of them aren't into the sci-fi genre, and that's why they turned to define it as a horror film. So I think it would have been better if I could have aimed it at people that do tend to watch sci-fi films a lot more than the people that I did choose. I did also ask about 4 males about my film, which I described in the paragraphs above. They generally liked it. I think there was an agreement with many of the girls about how, some of the filters should be changed. They didn't seem to find the plot confusing, which was a good thing. Stereotypically, boys are more likely to watch sci-fi films as opposed to girls, but that was obviously a stereotype, and I think it kind of showed there, which is kind of a negative thing, but it's, at least it shows that some of the people that, do normally watch sci-fi films were able to identify it as one. Following this, I got more feedback from my peers, just as additional comments. It wasn't really much of anything when I was progressing from 3 till 4, and obviously the final one, it was just general improvements made by the teacher, say turning up a little bit of the volume, which in my original audience feedback people wanted there. I think the main issue as well was how the character talks a lot to the camera, which is often kind of something that seems quite boring. Again, it's kind of down to personal choice, I think, and how you receive short films. I don't think it's meant to influence anybody in any way. If you're talking about audience theory, the violence bit, yeah, maybe. I also got feedback from my target audience when looking at my poster. I got the audience to look at several of my poster designs, and they tallied up next to each one which one they preferred, and it was quite close between the choices, and each gender kind of similarly agreed on the same sort of one that they preferred. For the target audience feedback of my poster, both genders generally agreed on the same poster. It was very close, and you can see that what I did is got them to tally up next to the boxes the pictures of the posters which they preferred. A negative thing about it is the fact that I did ask many of my peers, again, which incurs a problem of favouritism bias, but because it's down to just a general choice, that isn't much of an issue here. I did get most of my media class involved in looking at it as well. They are my target audience, and they are most critical of any sort of ancillary product I'm going to do, so that gave me good advantage. Furthermore, after I did that, I made a few more amendments to the text, asking a few other peers and media students themselves, just on which one was the more effective composition-wise in terms of image. In my film article research, I just had one design, and I asked questions to several people and members of my target audience about what they thought of it. They were quite analytical questions, I suppose, just trying to decode what they thought of it and whether each technique was effective, so whether the body text was the right size, whether the image was the right saturation, whether it needed, darkening, whether it was obvious that these were stereotypically heterosexual couple, or, that this was a sci-fi film. There wasn't much discrepancy between the two genders. It was fairly equal again, so that was good. One of my youngest members of the target audience was 15, and that is the youngest bracket for my film, and the oldest was 19. Both of them were my cousins, so just like the idea with the friends, which I did ask as well, there is some favouritism there and bias, which is a negative thing. However, I did get other media students. A lot of the people, my friends, are quite critical, and I know, I'm not scared of getting any, criticism from it. So, it may have been affected there as well. But I think writing the questions I did help to combat, perhaps, them being... It basically forced them to give more of a longer answer, and, not just to say yes or no, and just to kind of, make them question, whether there were any improvements that could be made, and forcing them to also be quite critical of it. One of the main things identified by the youngest member was that it wasn't quite clear as to why they were the two characters were standing the way they were, particularly when, the image looks quite clear and quite a positive thing itself. So I think as like a boy, he kind of expected it to be more grainy, or to have more of an effect on it, as if they were quite muddy, as if they're to heighten the verisimilitude of the film being a sci-fi film, apocalyptic film. I also then got further feedback from my teacher, and I hate getting that with regards to the saturation, following what my cousin had said, and that was the most useful thing. Another issue was the text. A lot of people found that, well, particularly one person found that the text didn't seem interesting, which is true of what you would normally do with a magazine. You try and make it more interesting, and you try and have more conventional aspects to it, which led to me having the sort of header at the bottom where I had the page number, magazine name, and made sure to do that. One of the main issues is bias, because the target audience that I asked were my friends. I did ask some people that I don't normally talk to when I had the tally charts, as well as just general media students themselves. So that gave me more of a critical response, and although I say that my friends are quite critical, there is going to be a risk of bias, and I think in the way that I collected the evidence, it wasn't quite effective as I would have liked to. If I was to try and do it again, I would have to distribute on a wider scale and get in contact with more people. But considering that a fair amount of my friends are fans of dystopian apocalyptic films, they were more suited to as my target audience. A lot of other people aren't specifically interested in sci-fi films, so to have to you know, to try and ask them, it wouldn't be reflective of my true target audience. I mean, in my first bit with my research with my short film, there were a few of them, as said, that weren't sci-fi fans. But then again, there aren't many that are fans within the school, within my year group, that I could have access to.